On March 19, 2003, the day of the invasion of Iraq, Ann Wright resigned from the State Department, citing the decision to invade Iraq without the blessing of the UN Security Council, the lack of policy in regard to North Korea, the lack of effort in the Israel-Palestine peace process, and the curtailment of civil liberties within the United States. Since her resignation, Ann has done an enormous amount of work in the anti-war movement, including her participation in Camp Casey and the Bringing Them Home Now bus tour of Cindy Sheehan, and testifying at a hearing on behalf of Lieutenant Aaron Watada, who was being court-martialed for his principled opposition to the war. She has been arrested repeatedly for her involvement in anti-war protest, and was one of the first recipients of the first annual Truth Out Freedom and Democracy Awards. On April 1st of this year, Ann appeared on the O'Reilly Factor. After pointing out to O'Reilly that she had 26 years of military service and asking how many he had, her microphone was cut off. I think it's also worth noting that our original date for this speech was postponed because Ann was again arrested in Washington, this time for comments about the FBI, and I'll invite her to say more about that if she'd like. It's with great pleasure and honor that we invite Ann Wright to speak this evening.
Thank you, Randall. It's a pleasure to finally be here. I mean, it's one thing to be walking out of the halls of Congress thinking you're going to a plane to go to Brown University and speak that night, and all of a sudden you can't go. The cops stop you. And all you've done is stand up in a hearing, John Conyers' judiciary hearing, where they were talking about the abuse of the FBI in using those national security letters without tying them to a specific investigation. But they were just sending out letters saying to banks, your bank, to your telephone company, I'd like to have the files on Randall. I'd like to have the bank account of Faith. I'd like to know a little about, and these banks and these telephone companies just, whenever they receive these letters, they just hand over our information. So finally the Congress has gotten after them, and they call the FBI in on the carpet, and they were really telling them what for. You know, the American public doesn't trust you anymore because of what you've done. Well, one of the Republican congressmen had just said that to the Inspector General of the FBI when I needed to get up and leave to go catch the plane. So I thought, well, I'm a member of the American public, and I'll just testify to them right now. You know, because you as a citizen, you can be in the halls of Congress, and you can be in congressional hearings, and you can speak, even though you're not an invited guest. You can stand up, and if you say something very short and sweet and succinct and then either sit down or go on out, you can do that. Well, I've done it many a time. And I've also done it at length where I would be hauled out and arrested after it because I wouldn't shut up. But this time I knew I needed to come up to Brown, so I just stood up and said, yes, Congressman, you're exactly right. As a member of the public, I don't trust the FBI. And thank you for having these hearings on the abuse of national security letters. And please have a federal judge authorize every one of those letters. Well, Congressman Conyers, as he has to do as the chairman of the committee to have a little law and order in those congressional hearings, he said, thank you, ma'am, thank you. Please either sit down or go on out the door. And I said, thank you. I will be going on out the door. I've got someplace to go. And off I went. And Mike, the police officer, was at the door and opened it. I know Mike from many other arrests. And as Mike opened the door, he said, that was a very good comment, very good. I don't trust him either. Well, as I went into the hallway, here came another police officer, a captain, Captain Sullivan, who said, arrest her. And Mike and I looked at each other like, what for? I mean, we know what the rules are on arrest, and I hadn't broken any of the rules. Well, this police captain, who had, as we found out later, had another run-in with some other people that had been in a congressional hearing, and he had lost on that one. He was going to make sure somebody went to jail that day, and he said, arrest her, arrest her. And Mike was going, she didn't do anything. Arrest her. Well, the noise level was getting higher and higher in the hallway because I was saying, I didn't do anything to get arrested. Don't arrest me, arrest somebody else. I've got to go catch a plane. Well, Sullivan just kept going, no, arrest her, arrest her. Well, one of Conyers' staff members from the Judiciary Committee came out and said, what's going on? Don't arrest her. Nobody has ordered her to be arrested. Usually it's the committee chair that taps twice with the gavel. Once, you know you're going to be taken out. Twice, you're arrested. Nobody had heard any gavel taps. The chief of staff of the Judiciary Committee, no, don't arrest her. Well, this Captain Sullivan, arrest her, put her in cuffs right now and get her out to the squad car. Well, before I knew it, out I went. So 2 hours later, guess who was over at the hearing, or not the hearing, but the police station? A representative of John Conyers, who paid my fine. Yes. So anyway, that's the story of why I missed being here. But tomorrow, I'm here tonight, but let me tell you about something happening in your community tomorrow before we start talking about what's going on in Iran. How many of y'all have paid your taxes? How many of you paid your taxes? Okay, well, good law-abiding citizens funding the war. Yeah, oh, oops. I paid mine too, but did you put a little note in it saying, don't use my tax money for war? Good, thank you. Well, tomorrow you'll have an opportunity, if you want to, go out at the main post office, and tomorrow there is a tax day protest. And Danny Ritchie, right here, stand up, will you? She and some other colleagues are going to be down at the main post office, so if any of you all care to go down there with your signs, say, don't use my money for war, you know, something like that, to let people know in your community that those monies that they are paying tomorrow, what percent is it that are now going to the war? I think it's something like 40% of our money right now is going to war-related activities. So if you don't want that to happen, it's time to do something in your communities about stopping this war and stopping the funding of it. And although I can certainly do 3 hours worth of my views on us stopping the war in Iraq, which needs to stop now. It doesn't need to stop in 18 months, which is the current House proposal. 18 months. How many deaths does that mean? House of Representatives says it's just fine if we have 1,800 more Americans dead, because it's 100 a month that are dying. So under the House proposal, 1,800 Americans will die. How many Iraqis? 3,000 Iraqis die per month, 18 months. 54,000 Iraqis will be dead under that proposal. The Senate proposal, 12 months more of war. Then we can end it. 1,200 Americans, 36,000 Iraqis will die. I say that's not what I voted them to do. I voted them to stop the killing now. So any of you all that want to join us in Washington to talk about the war in Iraq, please come on down there. And then on the other side of the T-shirt that says stop the war in Iraq, we've got to put don't start a war in Iran. And that's what I'll talk to you all about tonight. My concerns about the possibility, the probability. I don't know which one. Let's talk about it, and then you can figure out whether it's a possibility or a probability that the United States of America will attack yet a third country in that region of the Middle East. Iran, a country that is surrounded by the United States of America. Iraq on the west, Afghanistan on the east, 2 carrier groups to the south, a third one coming in. Iran, a country of a history, recorded history of 2,500 years at least, a country of 68 million people, a country 3 times as large as Iraq, a country that has not been devastated by 12 years of sanctions as Iraq was, a country that has a very large military, a country that has nuclear ambitions. Nuclear for what? For energy? For weapons? That's the big question. A history with the United States of America that's quite extensive, starting in the 50s, when the CIA was a part of a group that overthrew the elected government of Iran and put in the Shah of Iran. 20 years later, 27 years later, there was a takeover of the U.S. Embassy. 50 some odd U.S. diplomats, my colleagues, I know quite a few of those, who were held captive for 444 days and were finally released in 1981 just as Ronald Reagan was coming to be the president after Jimmy Carter had agonized over what had happened for most of his presidency, and the captives, the prisoners, were released as virtually the day that Ronald Reagan took office. Are there any more things that happened between the United States and Iraq? Yeah, there were plenty. What about an airliner? 280 Iranians killed because a U.S. Navy ship blew the airliner out of the skies in 1982. A war between Iraq and Iran where millions of Iranians were killed and millions, I don't know if it was millions of Iraqis were killed. A war that weapons of mass destruction were used, chemical weapons that were used by the Iraqis on the Iranians, where over 20,000 Iranians were killed directly and 80,000 more of them are still suffering from the effects of the use of chemicals. And where did those chemicals come from? We were one of the contributing countries to Iraq that gave them the capability that they used on Iran, and thousands, tens of thousands of Iranians still remember that every day because they're still suffering the effects of that horrible use of really banned illegal weaponry that the United States was still producing, is still producing, that was used by Iraq. It was probably the biggest use of weapons of mass destruction since the United States used it in World War II, in the dropping of 2 bombs on Japan. So we do have quite a history, not only with Iran, but with the world on the use of weaponry. And right now we have some of the most extensive weapon systems